it's this idea of leveraging. And it's one of the things that I talk about with my clients, moving them from launching their business to the point where they're leveraging, right? You have to get to the point, if you grow a business, where you're leveraging your marketing, you're leveraging your money, you're leveraging your team, right? Or you can't scale. And it's the same thing with money. Can you get to the point where you live on the money that your money makes instead of living on the money that you make?
Or, the business getting it to the point where it's basically running itself. I call it, in my world, I call it procrastination for fun and profit. So I go the lazy route of what can I do to where I don't have to work as much as I possibly can.
Hi, I'm Erin Marcus, former corporate executive turned entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Conquer Your Business. Welcome to the Ready Yet podcast. We're excited to bring you more than 100 episodes of interviews and insights designed to help entrepreneurs get the financial and emotional freedom they need in order to build a business and a life they're proud of.
All right. And welcome to this episode of the Ready Yet podcast, where today we are talking to Jeff Kikel about, I almost called you Jeff Kikel because we've had this entire conversation about Jewish pastries.
I'm not a pastry.
It's not a pastry.
Usually what I say is people go, well, is it Jeff or Jeffrey or Ery? And I'm like, no, I'm free, not furry.
There you go. I'm Kikel, not Kikel.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. I love the name of what it is you focus on, Freedom Day Method. I have my own definition, I guess, that I'm applying to that concept, but we're here to talk about yours and see where they intersect. So before we get all up in your business, why don't you tell people a little bit more formally who you are and what you do?
Well, wonderful. I am the chief poobah of the Freedom Day cult. But basically, I've spent 30 years in the financial services industry. Really, about 6-7 years ago, I kind of went off the deep end and stopped working for other people, went to work for myself, built 7 businesses during that time period, one being a very large wealth management practice. I built businesses in the co-working industry, in marketing, and kind of helping people get their marketing set up as small businesses. Built a media company, wrote a bunch of books during that time period. I totally went off the deep end, realizing that I never wanted to work for another person ever again, and I had to figure out a way to get my freedom. And that really came to a few years ago, starting to have conversations with clients that they just kind of, there was this weird little split that happened where the people that were, let's call it 35 and under, when we would talk about retirement, they would just glaze over because they grew up in the post 4-hour work week world, where it was like, hey, figure out a way to make money so that you don't have to work a job for the next 40 years. So for them, retirement was like, I don't get this. I don't want it. And then I had the people that were, let's say, 50 and above that were looking at life and going, oh, crap, we screwed around too much in our early years. There's no way in hell we're going to have enough money to retire at this point. We give up. And I started to realize that the problem with that is the traditional wealth management was broken. We focused on the wrong stuff. We focused on growing assets to a certain dollar amount. And then once we had that dollar amount, then we could retire. And that's not really what you need to focus on.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways we can go. And I want to get into that because I do think, my background is also in financial services. And one of the things that I realized when I was in a position to be invited into rooms that were above my pay grade, I found myself in this amazing opportunity where I was invited into rooms that were like way above my pay grade. And I was learning amazing things. And one of the things I realized is the difference between the people who have and the people who don't have often comes down to access to information.
Yeah.
It's access to information, like an understanding of how systems work, an understanding of realizing where your entry points are into the different systems that this country has. And to your point, enough information to reinterpret, right? Reinterpret how these systems may or may not work instead of blindly following.
And I would say it's just also a different relationship with assets. You know, you have the poor or the not as wealthy that think of assets as like, okay, I bought a TV, or I bought this, or I bought that. And typically I'm buying it on credit because I don't really have the money, but I'll pay it off over time, or I'll buy that car that I probably can't afford, or I'll get that education that I probably shouldn't have gotten and paid as much money for. You know, the rich have just a different philosophy, and it's always about, okay, I have income coming in. What am I going to do with this? Well, okay, I'm going to buy something that is an asset that's going to generate more income. And eventually I'm going to work myself to the point where I have enough assets that are generating income that I don't really have to work anymore.
Right. And it's right. It's this idea of leveraging. And it's one of the things that I talk about with my clients, moving them from launching their business to the point where they're leveraging. Right. You have to get to the point, if you grow a business, where you're leveraging your marketing, you're leveraging your money, you're leveraging your team, right? Or you can't scale. And it's the same thing with money. Can you get to the point where you live on the money that your money makes instead of living on the money that you make?
Or, you know, the business getting it to the point where it's basically running itself. I call it, in my world, I call it procrastination for fun and profit. So I go the lazy route of what can I do to where I don't have to work as much as I possibly can. And
it's a fun way to say, like, it can be simple and still be effective. I think, right, the human brain, we tend to think if it's not hard or exciting all the time, it must not be working. But that's not actually true.
Yeah. And it's really boring. I mean, quite frankly, it's like, it's the most boring. I mean, even my investment philosophy even my investment philosophy, I'm like, it's pretty boring. I mean, it's not fancy. And, you know, I just do really good things over and over and over again and make good profit on them. And I don't really have to work then. You know, I mean, I typically trade twice a week in those cases in my portfolio. And most cases I make 20 or 30% at least, maybe 50 on a trade. And I'm like, that's all I need to work this week.
So where do people get started on this? Because I think this is, you know, the human brain has a really great habit of thinking all or nothing. Either I'm debt free and I got money in the bank and now I can go do what Jeff's talking about.
Or how do I get there?
So where does somebody start if they want to start learning and adopting this approach?
Well, and that's why I created the Freedom Day method. You know, I wanted to quantify this, and, you know, nothing in this world is earth shattering. It's just, I realized that there was a way to sequence this to make it work for every person if they put in the effort. So, you know, where they start is you got to know where the hell you're at to begin with. So you've got to figure out what your budget is. And we're very serious about this. So, you know, in the old days, when I would do financial planning with a client, I would just say, well, you know, how much do you think you spend on a monthly basis? Well, you only spend, you know, $4,000. Okay, well, you make 20.
And you've got zero.
You have nothing saved.
Where to go?
So obviously, there's a problem here. So today I am a little bit more forceful, and I make them actually physically write down a budget, because we need to understand where money is going. Money will go wherever it is told to go. Otherwise, it'll go wherever it wants.
It'll just go away, right?
It just goes away, and it just disappears into Nikes and everything else and vacation. So, you know, we have them do that, and from that budget, we're able to identify what is their, what I call MRI, minimum required income. So this is what it takes to run the household. That's a key thing for us because it's a tool that we're going to use later on in the process to determine when our Freedom Day actually happens. So that's the first phase.
And a
All right,
lot
we're gonna
of,
knock
you know,
this
it
in.
sounds obvious to people who do that work,
Yeah.
but most people don't do
They
that.
won't. They won't sit down and do it. And I'm not one of these people that's like, oh, okay, you got to live by a budget every month. And, if you
Right.
spend more, you shall flail yourself.
Right, this
at
is
the end
not
of the month.
supposed to be punitive. This is data.
This is data. And it's kind of like AA. If you overspent this month, you go to the meeting and you're like, hey, I'm Jeff. I'm an overspender. Okay, great. We restart the process again and you keep going. As soon as you don't flail yourself, just admit that you're wrong, say your piece to the world and then get started all over again. So we get through that process. We figure out what our MRI is. Then we're going to go in and look at debt. We're going to look at debt from the perspective of, okay, everything I have. I separate out housing debt at this point because I don't really consider that bad debt.
Right.
Because we all have to have a place to live.
And it's an investmentable.
It is in some aspects. I don't consider a
depending
house.
on where you live.
Yeah. And I don't consider a house an asset because even if it's going up in value, it's sucking money out of my pocket nonstop. But when I look at, all right, now we look at our debt and we're going to do a very simple technique called a debt snowball.
Mhm.
So we're going to stack up our debt by the highest or the lowest amount first, and we're going to stack it all the way up. And then basically we're going to figure out what our minimum monthly payment is. We're going to just pay the minimum monthly payment, except for that small one.
That first one you're going to knock
one that
out.
we have in line. And we're going to look at our budget now. And if we've got a little bit of wiggle room in our budget, we're going to apply that amount towards that small debt. And then what's going to happen is after that is paid off, we're going to take all that money that we were paying in, we're going to apply it to the next one and the next one. And
What I love about that, and I've done that approach. I'm a big fan of that approach for a couple of reasons. Too many times people think they're not like they shouldn't. Right, we swing too far. The pendulum swings too far, and we start to get really punitive with ourselves.
Yeah.
And we think we can't even go have an ice cream at the corner store because we have some credit card debt. And when you put a plan in place that accounts for this, that means you do get to play with what's left over.
Yeah, you build a little bit into your budget that says, okay, we can go have fun. We can fall off the wagon a little bit. In fact,
I had friends a couple we were friends with when I was first married in my mid-20s, and she was great with money and he was not. So he was on an allowance that he called, which worked well for them. It worked perfect for them. And he used to call it his crazy Brett money.
There you go.
Every week he got crazy Brett money, and no one worried about what it went for.
Yeah,
if you're crazy Brett money, go have at it.
And I recommend that to couples. You know what?
Yeah.
Each of you has your crazy Brett money, and that crazy Brett money, if you don't spend it, that's your fault. If you spend it all, that's fine. And you don't beat each other up about it, because that's where all the fights happen is, well, you're telling me I can't spend, but you spent on this. And no, each of you's got your crazy money. Go have fun.
Yeah.
Live your life. I'm not saying you have to live like a monk to do this stuff, and I'm a Dave Ramsey guy, but I'm not a Dave Ramsey, eat rice and beans and all that stuff. I'm like, you gotta live your life.
It's not maintainable for most people.
No, it isn't. And there's a few people that it works for, and they needed that discipline. And when they developed that discipline, it stayed with them for the rest of their lives. But I think most people just live a normal life, and we just need to figure this stuff out.
You just need better plan and a better data.
Yeah. So now we know what our debt is. Now we get to go to the next step, which is fun. And it's what I call your bucket list. It's basically your intentionality of life. And we build a bucket list. Now, a lot of people wait until later on to do this. And quite frankly, it was something I came to very late in the game with the Freedom Day method. It was kind of the last thing I figured out. And I realized it should be the first thing that we figure out. Because what I want people to start doing is, the problem with retirement is, for somebody that's in their 20s today, it's 40 years away in the normal world, and people can't relate to that. So what we do is we build a bucket list, and I actually give them a bucket list journal, and I have them, and if it's a couple, I give them each their own, and they each write out 100 things that they want to do before they're going to die in 10 different categories. And we walk them through that. And that becomes their, operating strategy for the rest of their life.
Also, we don't get to do what we want to do.
Yeah.
Really want to do, because so many times our money is going to things we're not even thinking about.
Correct. Well, and we're saving towards things that we really can't quantify and feel.
Mm-hmm.
So, we get them to do that. And then we lay out 6 things over the next 6 months that they can do. Some of these require money. Some of them might require training. Some of them might require some kind of equipment. So an example for me was, I had on my list, I realized my friend who Roger Williams is like the bucket list king. He has a podcast. He's amazing. And when Roger and I talk, we both realized we love one thing, and it's like anything that rolls, floats, flies, anything like that. And so I looked at my list and I was like, damn it, Roger, there is 12 things on my list that either roll, fly,
that move
float.
fast.
Exactly. They move fast is the common thing.
I
or
get
they
it.
roll or something like that.
So there.
And I was like, you know what? And then when I started doing the math, I was like, all of them pretty much require $500 or less to do. So my things were, I wanted to drive a Lamborghini at the F1 track here in Austin. I wanted to fly on a I wanted to fly on a World War II bomber. I wanted to see this one train that there's only one of them that exists in the world, and I wanted to ride on this thing and all that. And I'm like, all of these are $500 or less. You know what? If I could just create $500 in income per month that would generate that on a consistent basis, I could just do these over a 12-month period. And so that began this year of what I call my year of intentionality. Was I said, you know what? I'm going to create that income. And that's the next step in the process, is retraining your brain from, I can't do this because I can't afford it, to, how am I going to do this?
Yeah.
What can I do to afford this?
Well, and when you tie it together like that, it's, again, remove the punitive aspect of debt repayment, tie it to what you really want, living life with intention instead of by accident and by default. It suddenly has such a lighter, exciting feel to it than old school financial planning, which was save for retirement so that.
Well, and it's why the industry is broken. It's why the retirement industry is broken, because when you think about it, who created the industry? Brokerage firms, mutual fund firms, insurance firms. What do they all do in common?
The people selling you the product created the industry.
Well, no, not the people that sell the products. The people that are the end result of that money being gathered. The asset gatherers designed the industry to support themselves. And this isn't a bad thing. I'm just saying they designed the industry to support themselves. Thus, they created the training for the people that sell the products or do the planning. And that is, okay, well, we want you to amass this big old chunk of money over a 40-year period of time, and we really don't want you to ever take the money out. But if you do, we're only going to let you take out about 4% of that per year, because otherwise you're going to outspend it over time. And you lose, you focus on this big chunk of money. And what ends up happening is those people that hit 50 and they're like, crap, I need $2 million and I've only saved 100,000 at this point. There's no way in hell I can't save enough to get there. Well, yeah, if you're thinking from that perspective. But if you're thinking from the perspective of cash flow, it's different. So
most people will now respond to this type of concept with, yeah, but there's nothing I can do about my income.
but that's BS.
Right.
There's nothing you can do about your income, but there's a crap ton of things that you can do about creating other little side wiggles and side hustles. I mean, it can be as simple, and this is what I teach people. I mean, yes, you could go out, you could start a business, you could invest in real estate, you could do all this stuff, but this is why I want people to retrain their brain at this step, because I want you to think about not, I can't afford it, or I'm going to buy it on credit, but I want you to think about it from the aspect of, how can I do this? Okay, I could go take a job at Walmart and make $500 a month. Yeah, but that ties up my time.
Right.
I could go drive Uber. I mean, I've done all this stuff. I mean, I did this years ago when I was writing a book for police officers. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to, all these things that could generate money, I can't tell people to do this if I haven't done it. So I opened a Amazon store, and we would buy Amazon returns from Amazon. We would basically buy lots of this stuff, and literally my wife and I would get like pallets of stuff in our house.
Logistical nightmare. No, thank you.
Yeah, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare business. It was actually very profitable. Typically we made 75-80% profit on the business, but it was a royal pain in the butt, and our house looked like a junk yard most of the time. You know, I drove Uber before, I've delivered food, I've done all these things looking at ways to generate money. And I'm like, that's great. That is something, you know, if you have something you want and you're like, hey, I want to learn how to play guitar. Okay, well, I'm probably going to need to learn how to play first off, and I'm going to need a guitar. What's a guitar cost? What's it cost to learn how to play? Great. Let's say that's $300 or $400 for a decent guitar, and maybe another $400. Okay, $600 later, all I have to do is come up with $600. I could drive Uber for 6 days and make $600, and I would have my guitar and do that. But my brain is retrained at this point.
Yeah.
Now, okay, let's say I do like I did, you know, all right, what I ended up doing is I figured out a way that I didn't really have to buy real estate, but I could control real estate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big control person. I don't really care to own an asset. I want to control an asset. So I figured out a way that I could solve a problem. And that problem was, there's a whole lot of people who have bought one rental house or 2 rental houses. They're not really making that much money on them. And they hate every day that they wake up, because they're dealing with tenants.
Right.
They're dealing with, you know, toilets backing up in the middle of the night, all that type of stuff. So I said, well, all right. I was listening to a podcast, and the guys were talking about traveling nurses. And I was like, well, that's kind of interesting. And I learned all about traveling nurses, and traveling nurses make lots of money, and they get paid to stay in a town for 13 weeks. So I'm like, great. How can I leverage this? I don't want to have to buy a bunch of real estate and do this, because I'm not sure if I want to do it. But I know there's these people out there that hate this stuff. So I was listening to another podcast, and the guys were talking about what's called a master lease, which meant I could just go in, I could basically lease that and then release it to somebody else. And either one of two things, I do it as a fixed, you know, okay, you want $2,000 a month for rent? Great, I'll pay that. But then I'm going to rent the thing out for $4,000.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you want, we can partner together. I'm not going to pay you a monthly rent, but we'll split the profits 80-20. You get 80, I get 20.
It's creative problem solving.
Yes.
It's paying attention to what's going on around you and solving problems that people have. That's what businesses do. Businesses solve problems.
Yeah. And my first one of those solved my $500 problem. I make $500 a month consistently, month after month. We bought well, or we chose well, and we've had for almost a year the thing rented for 13 weeks at a time, nonstop.
I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Ready Yet podcast, brought to you by Conquer Your Business. With decades of experience, Conquer Your Business creates business and branding strategies that build multiple 6- and 7-figure businesses. And we don't just show you what to do. We have an entire team of people available to help you do it, strategy and implementation. You can learn more and reach out to us by visiting conqueryourbusiness.com.
Stop.
I have a friend who, I forget what business she had originally, but she manages vacation rental homes in just a couple towns in Wisconsin.
Absolutely.
And it's because everybody was buying real estate, like you said, not realizing what a pain in the butt it was to actually then go take care of all this. So everybody owned one house.
Yep.
They owned one vacation house they were trying to rent out.
And they're not really kind of making enough money to make it worth their while.
Work.
Yeah.
Right. They're assuming, to your point, they've done it as an investment. So when they die, their heirs make money.
Yeah.
But they're not actually earning an income off of it.
Well, and you're lucky in a lot of cases. I mean, most people don't understand, everybody's like, oh, well, I'll just do Airbnb and I'll just throw the stuff up there. They put crappy pictures up. People don't want to do it. And then it sits idle for big chunks of the year. And the Airbnb world, it's like, if you don't buy well in Airbnb, if you're doing short term, you got to make your money in the seasons, so Wisconsin, it's probably summertime. Right. You got to make your money between like May and August, because after that it's freaking cold as all get out.
Coming from a true Texan, but we have a thing up here called winter sports that's bigger than summer.
There is no winter sports. That's just. That's
she's
wrong.
Here she is. She's got a more than over $1 million business because she solved a problem that these individuals had.
Yeah, and didn't really require a whole lot of investment on her part to do it.
And you make more money and you invest in the business.
Yeah. So that, going from that point, so now we've retrained our brain a little bit. We've filled out some of our bucket list items. Now, okay, let's say we've created my $500 a month. Well, let's say I had debt. Where am I going to get that extra money to pay down my debt? I just created an income source that's $500 a month that I don't really have to work too hard with. And I start to apply that towards my debt and I pay my debt down, because you'll never be free financially or anything if you don't get rid of the bad debt in your life. Right. So we pay it down, we make it go away, we improve our cash flow once again, because we have less outflow and more inflow coming in, we improve our cash flow.
And what I love is it's not about not spending money. It's about spending intentionally.
Yeah, it's being intentional about life and not just wandering through it aimlessly or being the victim of life. Figure it the hell out. It's not that hard.
What do you want and how bad do you want it? Yeah. I say that all the time. What do you want and how bad do you want it? And most people have no idea what they want.
And how could you be creative to make it happen? I look at real estate and there's like a zillion different ways to make money in real estate, and it all requires just a little bit of creativity, and it requires creativity, but it also requires repetition of doing it over and over and over again. Sometimes you make mistakes.
Right. So I want to back up on this for a little bit, because we're going to tell people how to get a hold of you and have deeper conversations. Yeah. But I want to hear about you leaving corporate.
So
I also left corporate, because the awareness that you have now about the intentionality of that wasn't why you left.
No, it was because I hated what I was doing. Or I didn't hate what I was doing. I hated the people I was doing it with. It was interesting because, I pretty much always knew. So first off, I knew from the time I went to college, I'd spent 4 or 5 years in the military, jumping out of airplanes, getting shot at for a living, thought I would do that for the rest of my life. And I got out for a period of time to finish college, thinking that I would just go right back in afterwards. Well, I ended up getting a job. In college, I realized I really wanted to be a writer. That's what I wanted to do for a living. I got a job working for an advertising agency in Dallas. as a copywriter or as a junior copywriter. And I realized that I could make more money and not get shot at for a living by doing that. And so my whole plan of life of staying in the military and all that kind of went to the wayside. And I really started focusing on, well, okay, this is my career. This is what I'm going to do. Had a mentor who was like, nah, you're never going to make money in sales. And he was kind of the old advertising, Mad Men kind of. He was basically the guy that if you watch the Mad Men movie, that was him. Yeah. And then I was meeting him, 35, 40 years later when he was at the end of his career. And we still did the 2-3 martini lunches at the strip club with clients. That was the day. That was the end of that era. But he convinced me to become a salesperson, which, if you know me, I am like one of the most introverted people on the planet. I play an extrovert on TV, but I am massively introverted. So the thought of me going into sales, I was horrible at it. But I just kept doing it over and over again. And I realized today that it was the best thing for me because it made me kind of come out of my shell. It gave me the guts to actually do things, get out there. So fast forward, I spent a few years in the advertising business. I was working for a time with a bunch of people that we traveled. We were working in the Yellow Page business, if anybody remembers what that was. And we would travel all over the state of Texas. And I started looking around, and I'd met my wife, and I started looking around, and everybody I was working with was divorced. And I really liked my wife, and I wanted to stay married to her. So I decided that it was time to leave that industry and try something different. And just so happened it was 1995. The markets were starting to take off after a recession. If you had a pulse, you could get into a financial services company. Went to work for a big financial services company, loved it, figured out what I really should have been doing all my life. The book idea kind of went out the wayside and all this. And I really just focused on that for the next 17 years. Left there, went to another firm, kind of lost the industry had lost its luster for me for a bit. And so I went from there to, okay, I'm going to go out and start my own business, and started that, built it up, and then realized, wow, I'm not really making much money because nothing's coming in. And I got lured away by the last people that I ever worked for ever. And that was a year and a half of absolute hell for me, because I worked for people I didn't really respect. And we came to the end of that year, and I had my last ever review, and my boss, who I had no respect for, delivered the worst review I'd ever had. And I was always like the company man. So normally I would have been destroyed by this, but I just didn't care. And the president of the company and I were sitting in the room while she went and took a picture of this horrible review. And he looked at me in the face and he was like, "You are the worst employee we've ever had. You do what you want. You don't ask for permission. You have all this initiative and all this." And I was like, that's what you hired me for, if I remember correctly. And that was the moment that I'd really decided. I before that had written my first book, kind of went back to it, and I was looking for what I was going to use that for and how I was going to market it. And I discovered podcasting. I never had listened to a podcast before, so I listened to one called Entrepreneur on Fire. John Lee Dumas, who's become a friend over the years. And John interviewed all these people who had done what I was looking at doing. They'd left corporate, they'd created these cool businesses and all that. And at that moment, now what I was saying in my head to the president was, "Screw you, I'm out of here." Right. What I told him was, "Well, I'll try and do better, sir." And 3 months later, I planned my escape. And 3 months later, March 1st of 2016, I quit. I launched off with my financial practice, independent, and a co-working space idea that I'd had. And I would never recommend anybody do that. 2 businesses at one time, startups, really bad idea. and really no plan on how I was going to make it. I just kind of created a plan and said, okay, I'm going to do this, and then lit the ships at the shore on fire, and I went forward.
I had a similar where I left not under duress, or I was lucky to have these great relationships, but without what I thought was a plan, which in hindsight, that wasn't a plan.
It was not a good plan.
I was lying to myself if I thought I had a plan. But one of the things that you seem to have been able to do, and I'm sure at the time it didn't always feel quick, but I've been having conversations about this lately, and I'd love to get your take on, you've had, and I've had the same thing where your life sounds very segmented. And I have that also this pattern where the things that I've done on paper have nothing to do with each other. How do you determine it's time?
One, for me, I couldn't do it.
Well, the last one was a little obvious.
They made it
You were going to end up in prison for having killed somebody right. But the military, I mean, when you took the break from the military, it didn't sound like because you were upset with the military. It was time for the break to do the college thing. Like, it was part of the plan.
And I adapted from there. And that is my true talent, is the ability to adapt quickly. Too many people stay at things too long.
Oh my God. I've been talking about this so much lately with a client who has been working on a business that I'm like, maybe this business has run its course and it's served its purpose. And then interestingly enough, randomly, a conversation with my 80-year-old father just the other week about how many people spend 30, 40 years in jobs they hate or in relationships they hate. You've got one life, regardless of what you believe spiritually. You're on this earth one time.
Yeah.
Why are you spending it miserable?
Yeah. And if you've ever been to an old age home or anything like that, and you've talked to people there is very, very few people that you will ever talk to there that are like, I did everything I ever wanted to do in my life. There's a lot of regrets. And, for me, it was like, okay, yes, they made it easy for me. And I had tried multiple times to start businesses and failed, mainly because I wasn't committed. But the way I look back at it was, I was like, you know what? I am going to regret this if I don't take this opportunity right now, because I'm going to be looking for another job at this point anyhow, because I knew I wasn't going to stay there. And I'm like, okay, this is my opportunity. This is my time to make this happen. And, what for me happened was I discovered that there's really 3 different freedoms that we have. We have time freedom, we have financial freedom, and then we have what I call freedom of intentionality, the ability to control our lives. So, when I do my podcast, when I'm on my podcast, the last question I ask people is, what is your definition of freedom? And the most common answer that I always get is, I want to be able to do what I can or what I want when I want, and not have to worry about money when I do it. And that for me became my mantra, was like, I gotta have time freedom, I gotta have financial freedom, and for me, time freedom happened immediately, because I had a boss that was like, okay, you have to come into the office every day to be around the team. Well, the freaking team hated each other. It was funny because it's all women, and I usually get along great with teams of women. And it was all women, and they all hated each other, and they wouldn't talk to each other, and they'd all go to their offices. And I'm like the only one sitting there in the office going, why am I here? I need to be outside.
I had that problem when I was in commercial real estate, and I was on a team that was complaining that I wasn't in the office for 10 hours a day like everyone else. And I said, it's not my fault. I can do in 4 hours what takes you 10 hours.
You do, and I'm better out there.
If you'd stop playing fantasy football and do your job, you could leave in 4 hours also, right?
Exactly. So, for me, it was like, okay, so I got time freedom right away. I got to control my time. Now, I worked myself to death, and thank God for COVID, because it actually made me slow down, because I'd probably be dead by now. But I mean, I was working 70, 80-hour weeks. And all of a sudden COVID hit, and I'm like, woo, slow down. There's actually a life out there. I'm leaving when there's still light outside. It's amazing. But, it took me another 8 years to reach the financial freedom side of it, and that was my freedom day when it came to that. And, how do I define freedom day? We go back to our MRI. So we go along, we build up, we build up our, retraining the mind money. Then we start to build assets that generate basically a cash flow that is passive income. So maybe that's real estate, maybe it's creating businesses, whatever, creating online business, really easy way to do that. And then once we reach 125%, because I always get the ask, well, when's my freedom day?
Right.
Well, your freedom day can be anytime. It really is when you hit 125% of your minimum required income. At that point, you woke up that morning and you have a work optional lifestyle. Now, should you quit your job? Well, do you like what you do? If you like what you do, you're going to probably be the best employee that's ever existed at that company because you have no financial weight on your shoulders. You are literally getting up and going to work because you want to that day. If you are me in 2015, 2016, you are probably going to be the worst frigging employee that has ever existed because you know that you don't really need to be there and you don't need to take this crap from anybody. So
it's more about living life. It sounds, what I like about it is my point of view is be in charge.
Mhm.
That if you don't make decisions it's not about being in charge of anyone else, but if you don't make decisions for you, people who are not vested in you end up making those decisions for you. And what you have created and what you work on is an actual plan, tactics to back up this concept.
Yep.
Of how do you create life on your own terms.
Yeah. And there's none of this is anything unique that I created. I created some terminology, but it's how I stacked it together to say, okay, this is the Freedom Day method, and once you've passed that Freedom Day, then it's about,
accessible.
yeah, it's about living the Freedom Day lifestyle, and the Freedom Day lifestyle is, for some people, it's, I've got this bucket list of things I want to do and I'm going to go do those. For other people, they're like, hey, I just want to go do something fun that I enjoy. Maybe I make money at it, maybe I don't, but I'm going to do something I enjoy. Or maybe I created this freedom engine that is generating, or multiple freedom engines that are generating this passive income for me. Now I've got lots more time to spend on those and create more and more and more of those.
Nice.
I went from one income 10 years ago to somewhere in the neighborhood. Well, depending on how today's project goes, it'll be probably my 18th source of income, separate income coming in. So I'm also kind of recession proof at this point.
You're diversified.
Yeah, I've got income coming in from a lot of different sources. Most of it requires very little input from me. Once again, my belief of procrastination for fun and profit. Get yourself out of the middle of it. And I was a business owner I went from working for the worst bosses that I've ever worked for in my life to working for the single worst boss that I'd ever worked for in my life, which was me.
Right.
Because I went home with, at least that one I could leave behind and then go back the next day. That one followed me home, slept there, wake me up. Yeah, I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, everything else. And yeah, it was awful.
All right. You and I can talk forever because we do. I love what you're doing. I love how accessible and tactical this is. This is step by step. This is not motivational speaking and now you don't know what to do. Like this, This is how, not just what.
Simple stuff. Yeah.
If people want to continue this conversation, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you?
A couple ways. So one is if you listen to my podcast, it's freedomnationpodcast.com. And the other place that I would tell you today is to go to YouTube and search for Freedom Day with Jeff Kikel. It's Kikel. I am building a YouTube channel there where I am sharing all of these concepts.
That's fantastic.
In anticipation of the book that I have coming out, which will be about a month from now, whenever this comes out, I don't know. If you're listening to this and it's past, let's say July 2023, you can go to freedomdaybook.com and
We'll make sure that we have all that.
yeah, we'll give you a free chapter to the book there, the first chapter of the book that tells the review story, and why how I got to this point. But that's the best places to kind of gather the information that I have, and I'm sharing it as I live it in my life. Very soon, I've been filming all year long, all my little planes, trains, and automobiles things. So I'm getting ready to launch that, some very short things on there of the different freedom things that I've been doing. I didn't get to do my Lamborghini at the F1 track because that's been busy for months with stuff here. So I just happened to be in London earlier this year, and I got to drive the James Bond V8
cool.
Vantage.
Nice.
On the Silverstone F1 track. So
I've walked on the track in Monaco.
Okay.
Well, because it's basically the streets.
Well, I've driven the track, not at 200 miles an hour, but I drove it in a really crappy French car.
That's how you get places there. But I've also I have sat on the floor behind the pilot of an L5, which is basically a World War II lawnmower fighter plane. Like this was like, I was literally, there is no second seat. I was sitting on the floor behind him.
Pretty much that. And if it got hit by anything, it was pretty much shot down. So yeah.
And then I was also, I forgot what, steam, what was it? An open cockpit bi-wing.
Nice.
That I did barrel rolls and loops.
Nice.
Yeah, so.
Well, my original second one in the process was going to be flying on a B-17, and that one that crashed in Dallas was the one I was going to fly on. So I was like, damn it. But I found out
as well. I've jumped out. Well, you did it more.
Yeah, I did it about 685 times.
Yeah, it's a little different.
In 5 years. Yeah.
I did it twice strapped to somebody. I didn't jump out of a plane. I was strapped to somebody who jumped.
You hurtled towards the ground with somebody strapped to your back with a parachute on it. Yeah. Well, my last job in the military was actually as an instructor in Arizona, jumping out of planes at like 35, 40,000.
Yeah, we were at 35. It wasn't that 13. It was or not 35. It was significant.
Yeah. It's where you go out and it's like negative 35.
Yes, you can't breathe, and
there's no oxygen and all that.
There's no oxygen. You kind of have to hold the breath.
That was fun. Everybody asked me, well, why, have you been skydiving since? And I'm like, okay, well, I jumped 685 times, never having a single failure of my parachute. So the odds are not in my favor that this is going to work out well sometime. So it was enough. I don't really need to do it ever again. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your insights, your energy, your approach to all this, the accessibility of it, all the information you're sharing. Thank you for spending your time with me.
Thank you, Erin. I appreciate it.